Yes, everybody, welcome back to Talking Wolves. Welcome back for a brand new match preview on the channel. Another Saturday evening kickoff for Wolves, and this weekend we're hosting Crystal Palace in the Premier League in what is another huge game for Wolves, and I think this is a potentially one of the biggest games of the careers for Gary O'Neill. I think this is the biggest game of his career. Ultimately, I think this is a must not lose for Gary O'Neill. I think he'll get away with a point here, but ultimately from the next two games, as fans, obviously we need 6 points. We know we need 6 points. I think he'll get away with 4 points, but for me, he needs something tomorrow. If he loses tomorrow, I think that could be all for Gary O'Neill. Of course, let me know your thoughts ahead of this game in the comment section down below. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you are watching on YouTube. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or other podcast platforms, be sure to leave us a 5-star rating. And today over on Football Prizes, they've got a Mateus Cunha signed and framed shirt. A really cool display available for the next couple of weeks on their website. So if you want to get involved, be sure to check the link out in the top of the description down below for your chance to win. And yes, like I said, I feel this is a must not lose for Gary O'Neill, but really Wolves need 3 points, and I don't think there's a better opportunity to get 3 points against Crystal Palace with their team news, which I'll talk about in a minute. And of course we'll have the Palace perspective later on with D as usual. But the ending of last week's performance against Brighton gives me that little bit of hope, and I'm hoping that we could take the momentum from the end of the last game into this week against Crystal Palace, and then into next week against Southampton. I personally feel they're both winnable games. And next week, Saturday evening, I could be here talking about Wolves being in a much better position. But ultimately, with the way that we're playing and the unpredictability of this Wolves team at the moment, we could still be sat at the foot of the table. I'm really hoping, obviously, it's the former where, we are scoring goals, we are getting wins. Tomorrow is going to be an interesting one because I feel the performances of certain players, Tommy Doyle, Pablo Sarabia, who we did a video on, which I'll touch on in a second, I think their performances last week would have, for me, have done something that maybe is going to give Gary something more to think about in regards to starting lineup. And that's why today it's going to be so difficult. And shortly, again, I'll talk about what I would put as my lineup for tomorrow. But certainly, I think it's a difficult lineup to predict. Now, in terms of team news from the pre-match press conference, Sam Johnston is back in training now, so there's a chance he could feature tomorrow against his old club, Crystal Palace. Mario Lemina has been a little bit lighter on training this week, so may not start, which again, it will be an interesting one. So ultimately, looking at those things, it will be an intriguing lineup. I feel Doyle did enough to start. Pablo Sarabia, we did a great video. Gully did a video on him this week, which is available to watch on the YouTube channel if you want to go and watch that back. I feel he could start as well. In my predicted lineup here, I think he'll go back to Johnston. I certainly think Sam Johnston will be the goalkeeper that Gary goes on with and picks. I think Jose Sarr had a good, solid performance against City, good saves at times against Brighton, but ultimately, I think, his mistake with the poor distribution cost us that first goal. I would possibly go with sort of a hybrid back 5, back 4, and Totti left back, Dawson and Bueno centre backs, Semedo right back, Aït-Nouri on the left, Cunha as the number 10, Sarabia is on the right hand side, obviously Strand Larsen up front, and then the two holding midfielders. I think Doyle is one of those, and then either Andre or João Gomes. I think the fact that João Gomes played the amount of minutes that he did last week may mean that Gary prefers him. But obviously Lemina came off with a slight knock, not going to be 100%. So I think that gives somebody else a chance to step in and play. Andre and João Gomes, I think, are both very good footballers. I just feel that Gary probably prefers João Gomes at the moment, but still a very solid team. And that's how I would start. I think that is fair to players that came on last week and played and contributed towards the fight back against Brighton. But still a lot of quality in there, and should be enough quality. In regards to Palace, their team news today, and you'll see shortly on the opposition perspective with D, it was sort of up in the air at the time of recording that. the pre-match press conference, so it's been confirmed Eze is now out until the international break, which is a huge boost for Wolves. Hasn't been at his best, Eze, but still always a danger and still can create chances and be a really tricky player to play against. Adam Wharton, again, a player that is, a lot of people are keeping their eye on, made the England squad in the summer as well. He's out. He's having surgery, so he's out for a number of weeks, so we haven't got to worry about him. And like Dee goes on to say, in the opposition perspective, they're really struggling in terms of numbers. So, look, they're not a bad side, Palace. They've still got players. Mateta, again, although he hasn't really found that form he had towards the end of last season, is a danger. They've got some quality at the back as well. Their issue is sort of the opposite to ours almost, where they are not conceding many, but not scoring enough. Whereas we're conceding a hell of a lot of goals, but we can still score. Just unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be more than the opposition at the moment. So I feel this is crucial for Gary O'Neill. There was a comment, although I haven't read the full article, so please take this with a pinch of salt and correct me if I'm wrong, but there was an article with a headline that Gary O'Neill said these games are they're not must-win games. For me, and for his career, they are must-win games. I think Gary O'Neill really had to try and get some fans back on side. He has to win these games. Otherwise, I think Wolves will be scattering around looking for a new head coach if things don't go to plan tomorrow evening. I'm certainly hope that's not going to be the case, but we'll wait and see. But we'll move on to the Palace perspective now. It's great to welcome Dee back on the channel to give his thoughts on Crystal Palace so far and what we can expect from tomorrow's game. So then, Dee, thank you for jumping back on Talking Wolves, man. How you been keeping?
Good. I mean, going into this game, much better than I was for the large parts of the past few months. So yeah, it's good. It's good to be here talking about Palace and of course with Wolves as well, because I feel like we've been similar throughout the seasons. I know you lot have finished in European spots before, but there isn't that much difference in recent times, in my opinion, between Palace and Wolves in the Premier League.
Yeah, I think in terms of quality, in terms of league position, there's a lot of similarities between the two clubs, and even this season, unfortunately, mate. I mean, you sort of flash back a little bit to the end of last season, where Wolves had started off really well, but ended the season dreadfully, and that sort of Palace result at Molineux when you destroyed us was sort of just summed up that end to the season for Wolves, really. And I think there were, including yourself, Palace fans are probably rubbing their hands together a little bit going into this season, although there have been some transfers and some players lost, which we'll talk about. I think you would have been excited with how the season finished under Glasner. And normally we see that quite a lot, where if teams finish a season quite well, they take that form into the following season. But for you guys, it's just not quite worked out that way so far. I've sort of had a quick look at your fixtures as well. It's been a mixed bag, to be fair, although I think there's been a lot of winnable games in there for you guys. So I'm surprised that after 9 games you're still only on one win so far. But what's your thoughts on the season's been? Is Elise that much of a miss for you guys, or do you think it's more than just that?
He is. He definitely is. I think Elise is a top player. He's a top player. He's going to reach. I mean, he's at Bayern Munich right now, but I think he's going to reach a level above that as well in world football. So yeah, I mean, missing Elise that was always going to happen at some point. Eze is going to leave. Gay is going to leave. That's not the issue. The issue started really with our business, first of all, which wasn't a terrible window, but we didn't really go for another number 10. Like we should have, maybe. We decided to go with Ismail Assar in the window, Eddie Nketiah. So we tried to fill the void of Elise with buying around 2 to 3 players. Daichi Kamada was another one that came in the summer, rather than one Flair-esque player, because you can't replace Elise, in my opinion, at Palace, because he's that good of a player, and we're not going to spend the kind of money. But the question is, should we have spent it on a similar type of player rather than bringing in 3 players? However, that's the approach that we took. I mean, in hindsight, we can talk about it, but at the time, it wasn't that bad. I think the main problem has really been the timing of those players coming in for the large parts. It was deadline day, so the manager didn't really have much time to work with this squad. However, as the time's gone by, of course, that excuse is less valued, because it's like we're approaching November now, so we can't keep talking about deadline day signings. But another big problem at the start of the season was from our own success. We were so happy about this, but 4 players being called up to the England squad. We had players representing Colombia in the Copa America final. So we had 6 players there. We had Chris Richards for the US men's national team. We had Mateta for the Olympics, who joined before the Brentford game on a Wednesday. So We didn't have a proper preseason, and I think it's taken a toll on us. But in the last 2 games, we've seen changes. We've seen change from Glasner back to the old Palace, and that is from the press. We are starting to press teams like we did towards the end of last season. So it's been much better like that so far, and we kept it up against Wolves, and not against Wolves, against Villa. We got the win there. Against Spurs, it started. We got the win there, and that's 2 wins now in a row, and. I mean, this is now the Glasner and the Palace that I know, under Glasner anyways, the last 2 games.
Was there much pressure on him, do you think, going before the Spurs game? Because obviously, similar to Wolves, I mean, we're still winless. You guys have got that league win now. But was there much pressure on him going before that Spurs game?
Yeah, there was. There was massive pressure on him. I mean, not just in particular for the Spurs game, but going into the Wolves game, because I think a lot of people expected us to not get a result against Spurs. And the question was, how long can we go without a win and say this is fine? So it was up until the November international break. That was the time period given, according to sources. So it was Fulham, Wolves, Spurs, and Villa in the Cup. And 2 out of them 4 games, we've already won those. And not have we won. The most important thing for me was the performances. Like, is this something that we can take forward? What has changed? Because we just didn't have balance in the side at the start of the season with losing Elisa. We played Nketiah as like a right-sided number 10. Then afterwards, we dropped Mateta and played Nketiah up front. Played Kamada as a 10, played Kamada as a 6. So we've been trying to figure things out. And I think the biggest change really is to solve that balance is put a wide player in terms of Nketiah or Ismail Assar in this case against Spurs that can support Munoz, because we play back 3. So Munoz didn't have no support all season long, and then from there onwards, it has worked out so far. So I don't think, of course, this is a massive game for us still, but we do have some big injury concerns. Lucky for you lot, unlucky for us. I mean, after 2 games, we've got Eze who went out injured. In my opinion, I don't think he'll be available for this game. I'm 80% certain for that, but let's see what happens. And Adam Wharton, he's been having an injury problem all season long. He needs to have surgery. We manage it day to day, but against Villa, for example, he had to come off after 20 minutes. Then against Spurs, he can play 90 basically. So it just depends how he's feeling on the day. So yeah, it's been just up and down. We just want a bit of consistency, but now we've got injuries as well as soon as we start winning games.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that about certain players in certain positions, because I mean, on our last podcast we had a discussion about this, and it almost feels like Gary O'Neill still doesn't know his best Wolves 11 as well. I think part of me for Glasner sort of could get it, because he hasn't, he's not actually been at Palace that long. I know he's had the pre-season and so on, but it's been way less than 12 months, whereas Gary O'Neill now is coming in towards 18 months of being in charge of Wolves, and you would hope that he would have some sort of ideas in place. And for whatever reason, I think we saw obviously chopping and changing against Brighton, and it did fall into place for him, which was a huge point for Wolves. But going into this game, it's massive, I think, for Wolves, because Palace's win now takes them up to 6 points. Wolves are only on 2 points. If you do beat us at Molineux on Saturday, obviously you go 7 points ahead of us then, which leaves Wolves in a horrific position, really. And I think Gary O'Neill had a similar sort of time frame. I think the club were going to give him till the November international break. But we play you and Southampton, 2 absolutely massive games considering the position both teams are in, to be honest. You mentioned obviously the cup game, so it wasn't just the Spurs game you won. You beat Villa as well this week in the Carabao Cup, which is, it's always nice to go on a little bit of a cup run as well. Eze, you think is going to be a doubt? Do you think Adam Wharton's a doubt as well? Is there any other injury concerns? I'd assume we'll hear a bit more from Glasner on his pre-match press conference on Friday as well.
Yeah. So it's not 100% confirmed, but Eze seems like he had a hamstring injury. So I just don't see him being available against Wolves if it's a hamstring problem in about a few days' time. Adam Wharton, he already confirmed it. He does think he'll be available for the game against Wolves. It's just the same problem. That's the thing. He just needs to have surgery. He's going to have surgery and be out for around 3 weeks. We've just been waiting on, I think, Cheick Doucouré to come back from injury, because we're kind of light in midfield numbers. So he should be available. But apart from that, I kind of already know the Palace 11, which normally isn't the case. It's pretty obvious, because we just simply don't have the numbers. There'll be a lot of academy players off the bench. So if Wolves start strong and they nullify, a certain position, let's say up front, you get Mateta, you put Mateta under deep trouble. there isn't any other options. I mean, what can we do? Who do we bring off the bench? There isn't another striker. There isn't another midfielder right now as it stands. In defence, we're fine, and thankfully we haven't had any problems there. But these last two games, well, especially the Villa game, with Eze being out injured, is caused a bit more of a problem now in terms of fitness issues, especially in midfield, because we play a two-man midfield. Lerma got a hamstring injury in the Spurs game, and then Eze out in the Villa game. Wharton ongoing problems with his injury. So the only two other options that are left is Will Hughes and Daichi Kamada. So it's pretty simple. I think if Wolves do their homework, they know who Palace are going to be playing and how Palace are going to play. The question is, how do you work around that? So I think it's a massive game for Gary O'Neill. I think the pressure's off a bit under Glasner after the last two wins. Because I do believe he's a good manager. He's won the Europa League at Frankfurt as well. And, you know, it's the alternative for Palace. I just don't want to keep changing manager for the sake of changing them. I think at Wolves is a different situation. I don't know your thoughts on Gary O'Neill, but from the outside looking in, it's continuing on from last season. When I was looking at some of your fixtures and some of your results, it simply hasn't been good enough. Since March. When
we've won one game since then, I think. So it's not. I mean, we'll do a video on Dee's channel, which I'll link as well, which will probably talk a bit more about, obviously, my point of view on those sort of things as well. You know, you talk about the squad depth there, D. Is that due to poor recruitment? Is that just due to bad luck and injuries? Or do you think it's a bit of a mixture of both? I think at Wolves, we've had a bit of a mixture of both. In terms of poor recruitment, all it takes is a suspension and an injury and you're under a bit of pressure. But also, I think we have been very unlucky at times as well. Is it the same at Palace, or is there sort of a sole reason for the squad depth?
Well, in midfield, I think we've been unlucky with injuries. I think the midfield depth is pretty solid. Going into the season, we did say Wharton, Decore will be the starters. Then we'll have Hughes and Lerma as the two options behind them. And, you know, we can just shuffle it about between those four. So it's not too bad. But then these injuries have come. Well, Wharton's been injured since the start of the season. Decore hasn't been available as well because of injuries. So injuries really hasn't helped our cause. But maybe in the number 10 position, that's where you can look at Palace and say, do we have enough depth there? We got Ismail Issa, which is good. Daichi Kamada, you can play midfield as a number 10. Yeah, that can work out. But then when you're tight in numbers in midfield, as we are, we don't really have many options up there. So I think the recruitment wasn't too bad this summer. On deadline day, a lot of people were excited. We brought in Trevor Chalobah, who's a great defender. Maxence Lacroix from Wolfsburg, who played under Glasner, who, in my opinion, is an upgrade on Joachim Henderson, and he's showing that. A lot of Palace fans were worried at the start, but it is working out now. So yeah, overall, I can't really blame the recruitment as much as I've done in previous windows, because it was pretty solid. However, of course, it was not perfect.
Yeah, I think Palace are probably... There have been a lot of parallels, because I think we had conversations about this about 6 months ago as well. But in terms of, you know, Neto for us, I've had a lot of people say, you know, you haven't replaced Neto, or losing Neto is obviously a big loss. Yes, it is, but ultimately, I think, you know, in terms of availability, and same with Elisa, you know, there were spells where he was injured quite a little bit of time, and Wolves and Palace seemed to cope fairly well. Obviously, it was a massive bonus whenever those players were available. But ultimately, there's other factors that why the clubs aren't performing probably at the level they should do. Like I said at the start of our little bit there, I looked at your fixtures, and I think, you know, there were certain games, D, where I thought you probably should be doing better. Look, you have played some tough teams, you know, you've got some points on the board, but like I look, West Ham is probably a game you'd earmark is trying to get points from. Brentford the same. Leicester you dropped points against. Everton you lost against. Forest, who to be fair have started off the season well. What's the reasons in those games, D? I mean, like you said earlier, there was a lot of players coming back late, so maybe the first couple of games I can understand. But you know, what are the reasons why Palace are dropping points in those games? Is there a clear reason? What's the weakness at the moment, or what has changed?
It's been tight margins. Some of those games have been very tight margins. Like the Brentford game, we get disallowed free kick goal. And then
I saw that. That was ridiculous.
And then a minute or two later, we concede. And then you know, we score another goal. but it's ruled offside because of Odson Edward being it's just pathetic at this level to be looking at all the defenders and still being ahead of them. Like, he had the whole view, and that's why eventually he did end up at Leicester, because even at the West Ham game, we created chances, we just couldn't take them. So I think our main problem so far, if you're looking at the season overall, has been taking our chances or creating chances. The only real bad game that I've seen so far is the Forest game, where we just looked clueless, and that got me massively worried. But then again, I did say after that game that maybe this is the wake-up call that we needed, because in other performances, we're talking about not taking our chances and acting like everything is perfect. However, in the Forest game, it was just terrible. It was terrible. And then what happened after the Forest game? We changed our approach. We went high pressing, back to what we done towards the end of last season. We got a win against Spurs, got a win against Villa. So in large portions of the season, we have... It's not like we've been getting battered. We've been in games. Against Liverpool, I think we should have got a point. But Eze hasn't been taking his chances. He hasn't been clinical in front of goal. But in the last two games, for example, he has been. Against Spurs, he got the assist for Mateta. Against Villa, he scored a header before going off injured. So it's just in front of goal. Defensively, I think this is the best back line that Palace have had since getting promoted back in 2013. Trevor Chalobah, Guehi and Lacroix, they've been fantastic. We've really had no major problems. At the start of Lacroix, in the first two games, he struggled a bit trying to adjust to life in the Premier League. Trevor Chalobah, he was X'd out of Chelsea. He didn't have much pre-season. So one or two games, he made mistakes for the Liverpool game and also in the Forest game. But apart from that, yesterday against Villa, for example, all three of them perfect. That, you know, normally when you are winning in a game and it's the final 10 minutes, you expect the opposition to attack you and create something. But I didn't have any moments of the game where I was worried. Similar against Spurs. Spurs this season, yes, they have had results such as the Brighton results, but they just beat Man City. And they've, you know, they have been scoring goals so far this season, but we managed to keep a clean sheet, and it falls down to the defense. I was naturally nervous because we haven't won a game all season long, but they didn't really create that many chances towards the end of the game, despite us being 1-0 up. So defensively, it's been great. It's just on the other end of the pitch, taking chances, creating chances, which now we have been doing a bit more. That's because we're winning the ball high up the pitch rather than sitting off the defenders and then allowing the opposition to build up from the back.
How are you setting those three up defensively? Is it a back three or is that part of a back four?
Yeah, back three. It's a back three,
Okay,
in possession, back five, out of possession. And it's not just like a back three that sits back. You'll have one of the back three that presses whilst we're pressing high up the pitch as well. So it is a very aggressive system, but it's a system which in past two games anyways, if the press is beaten, then you still have normally three defenders at the back. So it's not like, oh, Palace are open. So it has worked because in previous times, Joachim Andersen is not a bad defender, but we did have to move on from him for the sake of, if we're playing the back three, he doesn't have the pace. However, Trevor Chalobah, Lacroix and Guehi, they do. So it's made a massive difference where now we can press teams and take the risk because we're not exposed defensively. Well, so far we haven't. Let's see against Wolves. But yeah, so the press has been working well with that back three. So yeah, I think that's been the major difference. We haven't changed formation. I was the one calling for maybe a change of formation to create chances, but those chances are now coming off what we're doing high up the pitch.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've been intrigued tactically how this game goes because Gary O'Neill's sort of been and ahhing about a particular shape. We saw a bit of a hybrid of that against Brighton, with sort of Totti and Nate Norrie both being able to slot in on the left-hand side as well. So I'll be interested to see how both teams set up as well. And Wolves have actually been okay going forward, and I think we've scored in all bar one game this season, but defensively that's been our issue. So it's almost the opposite of to you guys, really. So Saturday evening, I think it's a massive game for Gary O'Neill because I think if you guys do beat us, 7 points clear of us, I think Gary's in a bit of trouble personally. Going into this game, what's your score prediction? What are you thinking?
It's a hard one without Eze. Funny enough, Eze hasn't been clinical, as I've said, for the large parts of the season, but in the last two games, he's been vital for us. And then we are very thin on numbers. Daichi Kamada is another player who, until he scored yesterday, was terrible. He's lacking confidence massively, and thankfully he did score that goal. So he looks a bit after that goal. He looked like the player we are expecting all season long. But it is going to be a difficult game, and I'll be honest, I'm thinking a draw right now based on what you've said. I don't know how you lot are when you're pressed. I have watched Wolves so far this season. You haven't been terrible. For the large parts of the season. It's just game management. For example, Chelsea game, first half of the Chelsea game compared to the second half
Yeah,
it's just
exactly.
a different side, and I guess that goes back on the manager because you have to be consistent throughout 9 minutes is a results business. But I'm gonna go for 1-0. I'm gonna go for 1-0. I don't think that's the best result for either side. However, I wouldn't be against it. Saying that, you should be hungry for this game. We got our first win, but of course we won 2 games now in a row, so we're looking for another win. But for Wolves and Gary O'Neill, after what he done against Brighton, it was a nice comeback. You have to be getting this win. I think if he doesn't get the win, then that should be it. I don't really see
Well, I said the same. I think after the Brighton game, I'm hoping that last sort of 10 minutes gives us a bit of momentum going into this week. But ultimately, I think in minimum, and some people will still disagree with this, I think minimum he needs 4 points from this week and Southampton next week. But that point has to come against Palace. If you guys... if we, to be fair, if we beat you, brilliant. You know, we don't need this conversation. But if he loses to you, like I said, you go 7 points clear of us, and we're 7 points away from the 17th place. That's a huge amount of points, even at this stage of the season.
That's the thing. You haven't got a bad squad, but
I don't think we've been awful, but just daft. And I think ultimately when things aren't when you're playing fairly well, if things aren't going your way. There's only one person you can point the blame at, and unfortunately, that's the manager. And one win. I think if you don't win on Saturday, it's probably 1 win in 20 in the league. That's unacceptable.
That's a problem. It's not only just this season; it's carrying on from last season. That's where you raise questions. With Glasner, I think the reason why he got a bit more time, and look, we won 6 out of 7 games towards the end of last season, and he was still under pressure. With you lot, I think you've given Gary O'Neill enough time. 1 in 20 is absolutely crazy. I think if it continues like this, and of course, I mean, unfortunately, you shouldn't be, but you will go down because that's not good enough to stay up in the Premier League. Let's see. Hopefully, it's not against us, but you haven't been terrible so far this season. I think Palace are expecting a Wolves side that are hungry because we were literally in your position about 2 games ago. So we have got a few results over at your ground as well, from what I can remember.
You beat us last year. You beat us comfortably at the end of last season. The year before we beat you.
Yeah, we beat under Vieira as well. I think
Johnston hacked Neto down at the end and never scored. I think that was his last Wolves goal.
Yeah,
but mixed results. We've had mixed results against you guys. So.
Yeah, but it's not like, for example, against Villa, we haven't won there since 2013. So we managed to beat them like that. But I like Wolves. I have nothing against Wolves, so I do want you to stay up, and I do think you got some good players as well. So you should stay up, but you need to get it going. But unfortunately, hopefully not against us. Against Southampton, get it going.
Let's see. D, where can people catch you and your content? Obviously, we'll be doing a video for your channel as well if people want to check that out as well. Yeah,
Back of the Nest on YouTube and all the other social media platforms. Of course, we'll be doing a preview with you and general preview, match preview with Palace fans and match reaction. So thank you for having me on. And hopefully we both get out of the mud because, I mean, we've had some half decent times in the Premier League anyways, trying to battle for 10th and 12th for the large parts.
Yeah. No, it's always good to talk every year as well, mate. So I wouldn't want to, I'm going to have to start looking for Championship channels soon. I don't want to be doing that. So, fingers crossed. No, thanks a lot, man. I'll catch you soon.
Take care.
So big thanks to D once again. As always, appreciated. I think it's going to be a close game, guys. I would side with a Wolves just pulling it out of the bag, 2-1 win. I'm not bothered. As long as, what time will it be? About 7:30 on Saturday. As long as we're there with 3 points, I'm not bothered how we do it. But fingers crossed we can. Fingers crossed, we put a bit more pressure. If Palace beat us, ultimately, they're 7 points clear of us. We're in serious trouble. We're a quarter of the way through the season, 7 points adrift. We're in serious trouble for me. So we need to win this game tomorrow, really. We need to win this. Otherwise, if we don't start well or, it doesn't go well, I think it could be toxic at Molineux. We've got the quality. We've got fantastic footballers. Now let's, put it all out there, show what we're capable of, and try and get our first Premier League win of the season. As always, guys, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below and hit that like button and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. The 5-star rating on Apple and Spotify. Enjoy your weekend. Come on, you Wolves.